Welcome to Tech Tuesday number 5, and I'm sure you noticed that I rebranded it IP Tech Tuesday in order to make it easier to find it when searching on LinkedIn and places like that. Okay, I'm going to talk about today is baby inventions. Okay, inventions are like babies. They can be, you can call it in a negative way, incomplete, half-baked, premature. Let me just give you 2 examples. So we have Dr. Mary was trying to find the electrical stimulation protocol to heal intestinal anastomosis. You know, when somebody cut a piece of the GI tract and reconnects it. And she discovered that when you apply 10 hertz to the belly button, at least in pigs, they suddenly prefer to eat fiber over chocolate. Obviously, this could be interesting. Another example, we have Jack. Last week, he opened a startup. He wants to develop a telephone that can fit inside your ear. And Jack found a signal processing method which can extract sub-vocalizations, meaning you talk but nobody hears you, but the machine inside your ear does hear you. Also, so what's common about these 2 inventions? Well, there's no product yet. Maybe there's a vision for a product, but no actual product. We know that these inventions are going to be improved. We know that these inventions can't work on their own. And this type of invention is especially common in startup companies and in research centers. So the question is, what do we do about it when an inventor walks in and they have a baby? I'd like to divide it up into 2 types of babies. The first one is one of many. So there's a recognized problem, and the inventor solved it, but you believe that this solution is only one out of many possible alternative solutions. And more than that, the solution itself is still very raw, which means that when you fine-tune it, it's probably going to change, and who knows how it's going to change. So that's one type. A second type, and of course, an invention can be both, is when you actually have a complete final solution, but only for one component of the actual problem. Okay, so the product that you're going to sell includes a lot of other components that haven't been developed yet. Just want to point out that sometimes the inventor doesn't see it that way. Sometimes the inventor says, there's a problem, I solved it, let's get a patent. But if you ask yourself, how do I best capture value? The right way to capture value is to have a bigger product which includes that component. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the song, "For the want of the nail, a horseshoe was lost. For the want of a horseshoe, the horse was lost." And the bottom line is that because somebody didn't attach a horseshoe properly, the general lost the battle. Now, most startups have a very weird situation. What they want to do is win battles, but the technical problem that they need to solve is more like a nail. So it's very common in startup companies that the startup company will develop a solution for only a component of the complete product. And the questions that we as patent attorneys are asked is, how do we leverage that solution into an IP portfolio that adds value to the client? Now, the reason I gave these 2 different types of babies is because each one of them requires you to be creative in a different way when we're talking about reach-through. Reach-through is when you try to protect something that is beyond the 4 corners of the particular invention that was made, and give a few examples later. One of the big problems with babies is that it takes them time to grow up. And there's really 2 different time traps involved. The first time trap is that the minute you file an application, you start the clock. What does that mean? 18 months later, except in unusual cases, your patent application will publish, and then you are at risk of losing the future. Now, remember, patents are about the future, and if it gets published before you're ready, you can lose the future. Why would you lose the future? First of all, whatever publishes will be used against a later patent application. Second is what I call a research risk. People can see what you're doing and do research, and then they can perhaps block what you're doing, maybe with some IP. They can supersede what you're doing, or they can just find a better alternative to what you're doing. All of these things, of course, are to remind you that one of your major advantages against the competition is that you have a secret that they don't know. The minute it publishes, you don't have that advantage. You do have another advantage we'll talk about later. So what is actually being published, especially in a baby invention? The first thing that is published is insight. Now, insight can be about understanding the problem space, and it can be about understanding the solution space. As you know, we cannot get a patent on the problem space. We only get patents on solutions. So these insights are published for free. Second, you're giving motivation. Once somebody knows that some technical thing can be done, they're motivated to do it as well. There's less of a problem of giving how to, because when it's a baby, you probably don't have all sorts of details which are actually necessary in order to do it. And last but not least, there's business intelligence. If you are a startup in stealth mode, or whatever you call it, you filed a patent, people can know quite a bit about what you're doing. We're assuming that you're not trying to deceive them with the contents of the patent. That's a subject for a different lecture. Now, related to publication is priority. Now, priority means that you have to claim priority within 1 year, or you cannot claim priority anymore. So it's partly a money issue, okay? If I have 2 PCT applications instead of 1, because I missed the priority date on my further development, it costs more money. The second problem we have is what I call a donut patent. If you publish one example of doing it, and then later on you understand that this one example is actually part of a family, your later patent cannot claim the entire family. It has a hole in the middle, and that hole comes from your earlier publication. The flip side, time trap, is you can be obsolete. And even though it happens less often nowadays, it can definitely happen in pharma, and it definitely happened to me even in high tech. So if you have a company and you want to build a moat against the competition, so if you think of an invention, it has several stages. First, it's a secret. People don't know, they can't do it. Next comes FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. People are not sure that your product will work, and they're also not sure if they will infringe your patent because you don't have it yet. Then you have a stage of risk. People know that you have a patent, and they can calculate what the risk is if they infringe it or how much it will cost to design around. And then there's the last stage that we don't talk about much, which is who cares? Nobody cares about your patent anymore because technology has gone by. That really defines a time window, okay? So there's a time window when your patent or patent application starts having value for the company, and the time after which it's not expected to be useful. And the question you have to ask, depending on how long you want to wait with filing, will the patent be useful before it expires? If you file too soon, the market might take time to develop, and by the time the market develops, your patent died of old age. Or it could be exactly the other way around. By the time you get a patent, nobody cares about it anymore because technology has moved on. And I've had both of these things happen to me, like I said, not in pharma, in computing, in medical devices. So a problem in any type of patent situation is, can you time the window? Can you make sure that you have a patent pending or granted so that its window of value exists? The advantage of babies is you can think about it in an early stage. Okay, one of the reasons why I encourage clients to come before they have even the ideas thought out is because it helps us understand when the window is and what we want to do about it. But not all is lost. Okay, the most important thing to remember is that patents are not about complete solutions. Patents are about something that you don't want your competition to do. What that means is that the job of the patent attorney is to find the critical components for the competition and define them in a way which is enabled by what the client actually invented or might invent easily, and attach to it a plausible utility. Let me give you an example. If you try to get a claim for treating cancer, you might not, but a claim for shrinking the size of a tumor is easier to get because you can measure it and see that you shrunk the size of a tumor. Now, if you manage to file protection for critical components, it blocks the competition, it doesn't give away too much, and in a sense, like I said before, the fact that it's a baby means that you're not even tempted to tell people more than they need to know. And it doesn't have to have been invented yet. Just because a client came in with an invention, it doesn't mean that the best patent to write for him is on what they've already invented. It could be on something they haven't invented yet. And that's why a dialogue with the client is very important. So one of the things you want to know is, when will we know about the invention, about the product, about the market? One of the things that's important the client gives you is their vision for where this invention fits in the overall business plan. Sometimes we want to recommend R&D that the client should do for IP reasons in order to get a better patent. I'm not going to talk about it now. It's worth its own lecture. Okay. But just think of the following. If you figure out what it is that will cause the most problems with the competition if they can't do, and is at least adjacent to what the client already knows, so a little bit of R&D can fill it in, and then you can get a nice claim which will block the competition. Now, this is all very frou-frou, and one of the things that can help is if you tie yourself to a particular market need or a particular product vision. So if you say, here's my product vision, here's my market need, and this is what the competition will need because of that, and here's a critical component, and this is why I can patent it now, this works. But you just have to remember that when you do that, you often block your own opportunity for finding other value for the invention. Just warning you. So I have a little tool which might help make sense of the situation. So an ideal patent covers the features that's critical for success and where a competitor has few alternatives, because if there are more alternatives, the probability of you blocking him is small. And look at my table on the right. The client invented something to do with the train. Okay, this is an imaginary world where trains weren't invented in the way they were invented. So one component is an engine. Another one is tracks. Another one is fuel depot. Engine needs fuel. The design of the cars. There's a risk of hitting cows and safety in general with pedestrians. So if you noticed, I organized them in order of criticality. You cannot have a train without an engine. You probably can't have one without tracks. Maybe you can have one without a fuel depot. Maybe you can have one without cars, and you can definitely have a train even though it's at risk of hitting cows. Now, for each one, I put what the client's proposed solution is, and maybe he hasn't invented them yet. And I listed how many alternatives the client has. And most important, question mark, can we file? Do we have enough enablement to file it? Maybe we don't. Maybe we have to do a little bit of R&D in order to fill it in. So you see that a patent on a steam engine, while it's the most critical part of the system, and while we can definitely file it now, is not such a valuable patent because there are two alternatives for it. It'd be much more useful to get a patent on the tracks, but we don't know how to do it yet, or a patent on the fuel depot, which we do know how to do. And something like a cow pusher, even though it has very few alternatives, and we can file it now, it's not such an important component, so we probably shouldn't be focusing on it. In general, we prefer the items that have more criticality and fewer alternatives. Okay. I thought in order to prime the discussion, I would give you an example, and we could talk, perhaps people would have feedback about this example. So if you're familiar with the way Post-it was invented, 3M were trying to develop a very strong glue, and instead of developing a strong glue, they developed something very weak. So guess what? It happened again. Mark was trying to develop a bright, strong red dye. And instead, he gets the dye that 5 minutes after you expose it to the atmosphere, it breaks down into, CO2 and nitrogen and stuff like that and dissipates. Okay? It's a baby invention. He doesn't know what he's going to do with it. He doesn't know what's a product. He only has one formulation and so on. So the question to you before I stop the recording is, what do you think we should file, when, and why you think that's important? What do you think are the risks in following your suggestion? And what activities that are not filing patents or keeping trade secrets do you recommend?